Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. When I became a chaplain and really began learning about law enforcement, I found cops who had stayed healthy, kept their marriage, and survived the repeated exposure to trauma and stress that comes with law enforcement. But when do those officers then go and share that hard-earned wisdom with brand new recruits? Well, they usually don't. And I want to fix that. So on this podcast, you'll hear from detectives and dispatchers, U.S. Marshals and county sheriffs, and the occasional medical doctor. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are sharing their wisdom and experience so that you don't have to do everything the hard way. Today's guest is Shawn Thomas. She was a deputy with a major sheriff's office in the Pacific Northwest and is also married to an officer. There are two related experiences that Shawn has that are of specific interest to us here. First, she was a wellness officer in a major agency. She had to build the airplane while it was flying, and a lot of wellness coordinators can identify with that. This will be the focus of today's episode. After that, I'll publish a part 2 episode that looks into the second experience she has, where the work she did in the wellness field led to her producing wellness conferences. Shawn has now organized dozens of conferences all across the country for thousands of first responder attendees, and that's a fascinating story as well. Here's Shawn Thomas of First Responder Conferences. Hello, Shawn. How are you today?
I'm good, Jared. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to have you on the show. You came very highly recommended. Tell me how you got started in law enforcement. Why did you become a cop?
My dad was a police officer. He retired after 30 years. And so just growing up in and around law enforcement was a way of life for me, which led me to that profession.
Did you always plan to become a cop?
No. When I was younger, I was an Explorer Scout for a little while just to kind of, find out what it entailed. Then I went to college. I took some criminal classes and I found them to be interesting. Just really didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I think I was probably 22, 23. Okay. 24, I don't know, somewhere around there. And that's when I just decided, I remember calling my dad and telling him, I think I'm going to try to be a law enforcement officer. And he kind of went, And I said, well, is there an issue? And he said, no, not really an issue. I just want to make sure that if that's the path that you choose, I want to make sure that you are as good as an officer as I am or better, because it's a hard profession. And I didn't really understand that then, but I understand that now, and I appreciate his support and wanting me to, do a good job and be safe and come home.
So what kind of jobs did you do in law enforcement?
Well, I did patrol. I worked on the Metro buses undercover for a while. So street crimes detective, not like deep undercover, but, riding the buses and doing some other things, some John stings. I also worked for Metro Transit. So we met, in Seattle, they have Sound Transit and they have Metro Transit. And so one does the bus, one does the rail. So I worked doing patrol in Metro Transit. I worked in the warrants unit. So I would go and apprehend people with warrants. And then I also did extraditions. I worked in the child support unit. So I would arrest people with child support warrants as well. I was an explosive detection canine for 7 years, so I did that. That was an awesome job. I loved that. I knew when I got into law enforcement that I wanted to work with dogs at some point in my career, and so I did that. And then I was on our peer support team for years. And when I retired, I was our wellness and resiliency detective, and I was training a therapy dog.
Awesome. It
Yeah.
seems like you've gravitated towards some high risk things with a bomb dog, and then being trapped on a bus with people. I can imagine that would be a little bit scary at times.
Yeah, I mean, we usually worked as a team, but I never even thought about some high risk stuff. I just did it because was interesting to me.
Sure. Now, you're married to a cop. Was part of your dad's advice to never do that?
No, I don't remember him. I don't remember him saying that, although I remember him warning me, like, be careful who you date, inside the profession or at the job or on the job, but never really steered me away from it.
Good. So tell me about your experience with peer support and officer wellness, both you and your husband.
Well, like I said, I was on the peer support team for years, 16 years, when I retired. In 2006, that's when I became a peer support team member. Fast forward to 2015, my husband had been on the SWAT team for about 18 years, on the department for about 27 at that point, was undergoing some organizational stress as well as cumulative stress, and was coping with alcohol. And it got to the point where he said, I need help. And I said, great, now what? We didn't feel comfortable reaching out to the department asking for assistance because I wasn't exactly sure what that was going to look like. So I searched and I found a confidential resource, and we got him the help that he needed. But during that whole process, I realized if we're both first responders and we don't know where to get help, there's got to be other people out there.
Yeah.
So my peer support captain at the time knew what we had been through, and it was suggested that we put on a mental health and wellness conference for first responders and their families. And I thought, well, sure, how hard can a conference be? But I quickly realized it was a lot of work, but we had around 150 first responders attend that conference, and at least 5 people after the conference reach out for some type of assistance. So it was clear to me that there's a lot of first responders suffering in silence. And I knew my department really didn't have any proactive wellness programs. We had peer support, but that was more reactive than proactive at the time. And I started talking to other first responders around the country and found this to be true with their departments as well. So when some of my first responder friends from different states knew that I had put this conference on, they asked if I could help them bring one to their area. So I just try to move forward with the local boots on the ground folks to make that happen, because every time we were having a conference, people were telling us how beneficial it was. Then I started getting phone calls with people telling me that it saved their life. So therefore I became really passionate about it, kept on moving forward. And now we just finished our 48th conference since then. And we just keep on continued to ask to bring these conferences to different areas. So we just try to work with the local folks to do that.
I'm thinking about the reluctance that officers might have to ask for help. Maybe that's directed at the department. What's the worst case so that a department could come and do?
Yeah, that they're going to lose their job.
Okay.
Right. I mean, so they don't want to lose their job, so they don't want to come forward and say, hey, I need help. Obviously, asking for help and having to admit, number one, you have a problem, and then number two, what your addiction is, especially if it's not just alcohol. I mean, I can't imagine somebody trying to have that conversation and thinking that they were going to keep their job, right?
Right.
Thinking that you're going to lose everything. You're trying to raise a family. Maybe you're the breadwinner. You don't want to lose your insurance. I mean, there's all these type of things that people just think, if they ask for some type of assistance, that's all going to be gone, and they just can't afford to do so.
There's horror stories floating around. Some of them are from a long time ago. Some are more recent, that somebody asked for help of any kind. They just wanted counseling or something like that, and they found themselves out of a job. Do you find that happens very much anymore? Is that still a problem? Oh,
I would hope not. Things have changed, right? I think we're moving in the right direction. I think that the agencies are trying to support their first responders a little bit better. We have a better understanding of mental health issues that are occurring. So I would say no, although I'm sure there's probably some departments that may find other reasons. That's why it's so important to have these confidential resources, right? You don't have to go to your department. And if you ask for some type of assistance and you get help, your department doesn't need to know why you're getting help. They may suspect, but there's nothing that they can do about it. It's all confidential. We have some with the HIPAA laws, and your human resources may know some things, but they're not supposed to share that with the department itself.
How did you go about finding that? Did you ask your family doctor? Where did you go to find that?
The only reason why we ended up where we did is because I was on the peer support team, and I went to some class, and I had heard about, I was actually in an undercover class, and somebody came in and said, hey, if anybody needs assistance, this is who we are and what we do. I didn't really remember.
They were offering help, right?
Yeah, I remember somebody talking about some possible assistance. That's when I called that person and I said, hey, can you help? And sometimes
one place leads you to another, and then eventually you find the right fit. But was that first place the right one for you guys?
Yes, we found the right resource that was able to get us the help that we needed. Back then, there weren't all of these resources that we have now. So I don't know if it was the right resource. Did it help? Yeah, it helped. And it all worked out in the long run. So,
well, that's good. That's good. So let me ask a follow-up question to that. How were they as far as being culturally competent with knowing law enforcement, understanding the ins and outs of law enforcement? Did you have to translate to get them to understand? Were they already up to speed?
I think they already knew what was going on just because of personal experiences.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's a common problem, that somebody will reach out to help, and maybe they'll go to their family doctor or something like that at first. And I've had multiple officers tell me that they thought that they traumatized the family doctor or the
100%.
first counselor they went to. And it's like, man, they were not ready to hear my story. And I could see the look of terror on their face. And again, it becomes an excuse to not go back for help. Like, well, I tried, but I just felt like I was dumping my garbage on them. And I don't want to do that to my own family. Why would I do that to somebody else? And so then you get into a cycle or you stop seeking help because, well, I tried that once and didn't work. So
finding somebody that's culturally competent is important because it is a different field. We have unique jobs, and trying to find somebody that understands that, it can be difficult. I mean, trying to find a therapist that you connect with, number one, is difficult. Number two, that's culturally competent and knows what you're going through is even more difficult. I mean, there are people out there. I think we're lacking those people. And I think more first responders are actually retiring and being a therapist, like getting their degree and going to school and to be able to do that job to help other first responders, just because that they know there's a lack of culturally competent therapists out there.
So let's talk about wellness programs at an agency. You were at a sheriff's office in a major metropolitan area. In fact, do you know how many sworn they had at the time? Like how big an agency it was?
Probably around 800 to 850 when I retired.
Okay.
Yeah.
What makes a good wellness program? I mean, that's something that a lot of people around the country, they have been the designated wellness officer. Maybe they're, a sworn officer that's in that position, or maybe they're retired, or maybe they're an outsider. And they get told by the chief, or the sheriff, okay, I want a wellness program. They're like, great, what do I do? And you get no further instructions on what to do or what it's supposed to look like. What makes a good wellness program in a law enforcement agency?
Well, support, number one. You have to have support. I mean,
support from admin?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. When I was in that position, I was trying to, number one, understand what resources we had within the department and then what resources were outside of the department. But if you don't have funding, that's another issue because, programs, you can't just use all free programs and hope that everything works well. I think that you also need multiple people doing that job. Well, I mean, depending on the size of your department, right? It's not a one size fits all. So you have to find, how big is the department? What is it that they need? What resources do they already have? Do they have to contract with some other resources? But having different types of programs is helpful too, because again, it's not a one size fits all. So having a variety of different things for what people need. When I was in that position, I threw out a survey and asked people, what is it that if we had these programs, what is it that you're looking for? And some people are looking for counseling. Some people are looking for physical fitness. Some people are looking for a dietitian. Some people are looking for help for sleep. I mean, so you have to try to cover all of those things that people need. And just like when you call EAP and you say, hey, I have this issue and this is, do you have any support for this? I mean, it's something that you have to have a wide variety of programs to fit everyone that's looking for something, or be able to refer to somebody else if you don't have that inside. I think that you have to have somebody that's fully dedicated to that position. More than one person would be helpful, because I found that for a department that size, it was a lot of work for me personally, and I was doing it full time. So, having a couple people would definitely be beneficial for any department that is trying to work on a wellness program.
There's lots of things that people need, and I'm sure you want to answer all of those questions. I do. As a chaplain, I want to try to help with anything that gets brought to me. But when you're talking about an agency's wellness budget, what gets paid for? I mean, what do you try to put out there and say, hey, well, I wonder if the agency will pay for this? Where do you think the line is? What kind of things should an agency pay for? And what kind of things are probably too far outside the box?
Well, I mean, I definitely think counseling is appropriate for them to pay for, because the things that you endure day in and day out aren't normal.
And it's directly job related. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And I know that our insurance covered, counseling sessions. So I think most departments are already doing that.
What about the other end of the spectrum?
A plunge, like a ice plunge,
Okay,
I mean,
like an ice bath.
You're right, like an ice bath. Should they? No, they don't need to. That's not, I mean, some fire stations are going that direction, which I think is cool. But I mean, that's not a necessity, right? So, I mean, if you have extra funding and you can do those type of fun things, or build like a sleep room or whatever, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do. But I mean, definitely, I think that being able to have physicals, and which, insurances usually pay for, it would be nice to have some mental health days. I think that the department really should provide like a couple days a year for mental health, right? I mean,
what does that look like? Can you explain that?
Well, I mean, just taking a day off. I mean, if you're exhausted, and I mean, if the public knew how unfit our first responders were because they're overworked and we're understaffed, we are always helping other people and not helping ourselves. And so we really need to focus more on our department and our first responders' self-care.
Thinking of the person who's running the wellness program. So wellness officer, wellness coordinator, do you prefer that person is an active duty officer or retired officer or civilian? Do you have a preference? Do you think it matters?
That's interesting. Well, I definitely think, number one, that they need to be trained in peer support.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that peer support is, the greatest thing out there, but if you're going to be talking to people, you should have some type of communication skills. Having them being culturally competent, maybe doing ride-alongs, immersing themselves into that department and culture so they kind of have an idea of what it is that those first responders are doing, and have a better idea of their job would be helpful.
Sure. Is it advantageous to be still in your career or to be retired? Do you think one's a little better than the other?
Well, as long, I mean, I think about it like when I retired, I was asked by another agency to come work for them, and being a civilian. Uh-huh. And I think it could have worked because I have been in the space for a long time. And that was the other thing, is it was a different department, right? So I'm not, I do not know the culture of that department, so that it would be a whole learning curve. As well. So I think, being in the department, working for the department, knowing what's going on within the department, I think is probably beneficial and would be a better fit.
Yeah, I know people like Wendy Hummel out of Wichita. She moved to a neighboring agency that was like right across the street. And so
Right.
that was not that big of a leap. She wasn't having to relearn an entire city, and not everybody in the agency was strangers to her. But at the same time, I know other people that really, they went in cold, but they, drew on their experience in law enforcement to kind of overcome the learning curve. What was your title? You were wellness coordinator, did you say wellness detective?
Wellness and resiliency detective is what they gave. Ward. I was the ward.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Well, anything military or paramilitary needs a good acronym. So when you were the wellness and resiliency detective.
The ward, yeah.
Then if you could go back now and talk to yourself, what should you have been prioritizing? What would have been the best use of your time as a new wellness coordinator? What should have been the first thing you did the first day?
That is a very good question.
What was the best use of your time?
The best use of my time was trying to find resources to help other people. And trying to find a wide variety, because it's not a one size fits all. So I think that was the best use of my time.
Where was the most fruitful place to find those resources?
Well, like I said, when I first got into the position, I looked at our internal resources to figure out what those were and we're all about, right? We had more resources that I just, I didn't really know that we had. And I know that the department didn't know either. And so my job was trying to get that information out to other people. And so we had like a general information bulletin email that would go out weekly. And I started doing like Wellness Wednesdays just to kind of let people know that, number one, I was there. And number two, what type of resources that were available to them if they needed some type of resource.
Were those mostly county resources or statewide resources? Or
So I included as many county resources as I could because, the department's going to pay for them. But there's a lot of people that are like, I'm not trusting any county resource. So where can I go to? And so then I started including other resources as well. The problem with that is when you put something out to the entire department, somebody is reading that information and making sure that you're saying what they want you to say. And so it's kind of difficult to share all the things that you want to share and not getting denied.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard. Like, I even created like a website offline for those people if they wanted to connect.
You're out there, the wellness officers on the dark web giving you good resources that admin doesn't have to see.
The people just were like, this is a county thing. I don't trust it. And I am not going to reach out to her. And the other difficult thing for me, it was such a big department and I just couldn't be everywhere and do all the things that I wanted to do. It was just, it was a difficult task. I think like with smaller departments, it's a little bit easier, because we have precincts throughout the whole county where if you are trying to create a wellness program and it's in just a city and everything's in one place, it's a little bit easier to do that. And that's why I said, really those bigger agencies need to have a wellness unit, not a wellness person.
I talk to wellness coordinators and chaplains and peer support people all around the country, all around the world. And a common theme is that they were shut down, stonewalled, delayed, frustrated by their own leadership. And I just refuse to believe that all sheriffs and police chiefs are nefarious, mustache-twirling villains. I don't think that's true. But why is that such a common conflict between the wellness coordinator and administration?
Yeah, well, I brought this position to the sheriff a couple years before I got the position. I said, hey, look, this is the direction we're moving in. We really need to be proactive. We need to do something. And it was kind of looked at and said, oh, yeah, it seems like a good idea. And then nothing ever happened. maybe because I just didn't keep on pushing. Nobody was doing it really at that time. When I kept on seeing the suicide numbers and got more involved in wellness and hearing people come back and say these conferences are so beneficial and important because, I had no idea. This helped me and saved my life. And so I'm like, look, we really need to get on board here and do something. And so that's why I brought it up again. And I thought, well, what do I have to lose? I'm going to keep on pushing and hopefully someone will finally say, yes, we're going to do something about it. And, we did. I just don't think that we had the support that we needed to continue, because the command changed.
Okay.
With COVID and losing people, it was kind of like, oh, well, that position's not important. And so we're going to reassign you and put you somewhere else. And I said, no, I said that this is crazy. It's not going to go away. And I'm one person for an entire department. We need to keep on moving forward. And it just...
Well, and as we know now, mental health did not get better during the pandemic.
No, and this was after the pandemic. This was after, I retired in 2022. But we were so short staffed and it was like we were trying to move people around to cover slots. And I just thought that slot was important, but I guess it wasn't. So I retired.
Yeah. No,
I retired so I can continue to do what I need to do. And my department still sends people to the conferences. Still, I just don't understand why it's 2024 and not all departments have wellness people. The peer support team is a peer support team. They volunteer, they have a full-time job. They cannot do everything. You need to have somebody dedicated to make a difference. I think that a lot of command staff are busy doing their jobs, which I totally understand, but being on top is a lonely position. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of command staff are like, okay, well, I have all these people working under me and I'm going to get them the assistance that they need. But what about them? Where do they go? Who do they talk to? And I think it's just important for them to learn wellness education tools and resources for themselves.
Virtually all command staff are in that age range. It's kind of our danger zone where they have enough accumulated traumatic experiences that they're at that. I think the average law enforcement suicide is in their early 40s. And we imagine these young 25-year-olds are being traumatized and might take their own life, but it's actually, 10, 20 years later that catches up to them. So,
yeah, that's a good point too, because I am on the board it's an organization called First Help, and it's first for first responders, and then HELP is an acronym for Honor, Educate, Lead, and Prevent Suicide. And I would encourage people to go to their website and take a look because we collect data, and I know it sounds morbid, but we're collecting suicide stats to help advocate for our first responders and wellness programs, right? We want to try to be proactive. We want to show that it is a problem. We have way too many first responder suicides and we need to be proactive and do whatever we can to get those numbers down.
I think collecting that information is vital because there's such gaps in our knowledge of what happens. We don't track retiree suicides very well.
First Help does. They're trying, yes. Right?
Yes.
Somebody has to submit them.
Yeah, I think First Help is pushing into that part of the conversation that nobody wants to have. And they're like, please, you need to submit this information to us. We need to record all of it because we can have a false understanding of what's really happening if we don't look at all the data. We need to know.
Plus, we're advocating for the families as well, because when someone dies by suicide, they're like, oh, well, we're not going to give you any benefits. And then the spouses lose everything right then and there. And it's it's horrible because...
And that incentivizes covering up the cause of death.
Yeah. We know that these jobs contribute, and I'm not saying that that's everything, right? But we know that jobs contribute to suicide. Again, we have to be proactive in doing whatever we can. And when you were talking before, the reason why it made me think about first help is because we do the breakdown. You can go on the website and it shows you ages. It shows you cause of death. It shows, the means of suicide, and it shows what the average age is, male, female. It breaks it all down. And so if you are trying to apply for a grant or you're trying to advocate for some type of program, please take a look at the site. And I promise it will help you, find information that you're needing to get the things that you're trying to move forward.
Yeah, some people might not recognize first help, but they've maybe seen the yearly, up-to-date tally broken into 4 quadrants, and those numbers, go up and up all year long, and that gets shared on social media pretty readily. It's a good graphic. It's an important one, but it's like I said, it's difficult to look at. Yeah. Yeah,
and it's underreported.
Yes. Yep.
So there's a lot more out there that we just don't know about. But if you know of somebody, please, get on the website and submit whatever information you can. It just helps, for us to advocate for others.
Shawn, thank you again so much for doing what you do and for talking to me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking about this stuff. It's so important. So I appreciate you.
As a chaplain, I get to work with the wellness officers in our department, and usually there's just one at a time trying to figure out what he or she should be doing and how they can make a difference. One of the reasons I like talking to and learning from someone like Shawn is that she is teaching me things that I can use to help develop both that wellness officer position and my own role as a chaplain. I'd like to see both jobs become more effective and better defined across all agencies so that we can make a difference in the lives of police officers. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to Shawn Thomas was because she produces wellness conferences all across the country. And so in part 2 of this conversation, we're going to talk about the wellness conferences and the transition from law enforcement to producing these conferences and a lot of the nuances of putting on a production this large in so many different places with so many volunteers. Talk to me about starting up these conferences. It seems to me that the person who asked you to, hey, put on a conference, that's a big ask. Maybe they didn't realize that was a big ask.
Well, maybe I think that's why they do it, because they realize they don't want to do it themselves.
No idea what this entails. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I didn't, right? It was supposed to be a one and done, and here we are. We just finished our 48th conference, so it's a huge learning curve. I had no idea what I was going to get myself into.
This show is free for everyone because of those supporters who quietly help me behind the scenes. If you want to help this show reach cops, chaplains, and other first responders around the world, please consider making a $5 donation by following the link that's in each episode description. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.